"They left us here to die," said the abandoned elderly couple. But what the farmer did next shocked everyone. Let me know what you thought of this story by giving it a rating from 0 to 10 in the comments, and tell me which city you're watching from. I really want to know if you liked my story and get to know you better, so please subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The red dust from the county road danced in the stuffy March morning air, creating a golden haze that filtered the rays of the rising sun. Arthur Miller adjusted his worn leather hat and gently tightened the reins of his white horse, Maverick, when something unusual caught his attention on the bend connecting Cedar Creek to Oak Valley. At 35, the farmer had traveled that route hundreds of times to sell milk from his Holstein cows at the local market, but he had never seen anything like what his eyes were witnessing now. Two solitary figures sat on the edge of the dirt road, their silhouettes contrasting against the vastness of the Texas plains. As Arthur approached, he could make out an elderly couple wearing faded hospital gowns, both staring intently at the horizon as if waiting for something that would never come. The man, appearing to be around 68, kept his head down, his trembling hands clasped in his lap, while the woman beside him held a small, clear plastic bag that seemed to contain their only belongings. Arthur pulled on the reins and dismounted with the agility of someone who had grown up around horses and cattle. His blue plaid shirt was stained with morning sweat from the milking, and his scuffed leather boots crunched against the loose stones on the ground as he approached the couple. There was something deeply unsettling about the scene that struck a sensitive chord in his generous heart, awakening painful memories of his own orphaned childhood. "Good morning," Arthur said, respectfully taking off his hat. "Are you two all right? Do you need any help?" The woman looked up, revealing a face marked by age and recent suffering. Her grey hair was disheveled, and there were dried tears on her wrinkled cheeks. She tried to smile, but the expression faded before it could fully form. We're waiting," she answered in a weak voice. "Our children said they would come back for us." Samuel Corbin, the man beside her, slowly raised his head. His faded blue eyes seemed confused, lost between the present and some distant place in his mind. His hands continued to tremble almost imperceptibly, and he muttered something unintelligible about machines and furnaces at the steelworks, where he had worked for decades. "How long have you been here?" Arthur asked, crouching to be at eye level with the elderly couple. "Since yesterday afternoon," answered Eleanor Hope, the 67-year-old woman. "Vincent and Roseanne brought us from the clinic and said they needed to sort out some papers at the bank. They promised they wouldn't be long." Arthur felt a tightness in his chest. The sun was already high, indicating that several hours had passed since the previous day. No responsible children would leave their elderly parents abandoned on the side of a deserted road for so long. His instincts, sharpened by years of early responsibility after losing his own parents as a teenager, screamed that something was very wrong with this situation. "Do you remember the name of the clinic?" he asked, trying to sound casual. Eleanor hesitated, running a hand over her tired face. "St. Vincent's Hospital in Cedar Creek. Samuel was having some issues. Some memory lapses. The doctors said he needed special care, but..." Her voice broke, and she clutched the plastic bag in her hands tighter. "But the children said they didn't have the money to pay for it anymore," she completed, the tears starting to flow silently again. Arthur felt anger rising in his chest. As an elementary school teacher for years before inheriting the farm from the godfather who raised him, he had seen many cases of broken families, but the deliberate abandonment of vulnerable elderly people touched on wounds he had carried since childhood. The memory of his own loneliness after his parents' passing mixed with indignation at what he was witnessing. "Are you hungry, thirsty?" he asked, already knowing what his next move would be. Samuel seemed to momentarily emerge from his confused state. "Water," he murmured, It's been a while since I've had clean water." Arthur walked over to Maverick and took a canteen of fresh water from the saddlebag. He offered it to Samuel first, watching as the old man drank with desperate thirst. Eleanor accepted the water gratefully, but her eyes remained watchful, as if she still expected to see her children's black SUV appear in the road's dust. "Listen," Arthur said, making a decision that would change their lives forever. "My farm is just a few miles from here. How about you come with me to freshen up and rest while we try to get in touch with your children?" Eleanor looked at Samuel, then back at Arthur. There was suspicion in her eyes, a defense mechanism developed by someone who had recently been betrayed by the people she trusted most. "We don't want to be a bother," she said. "What if Vincent and Roseanne come back and don't find us here?" "If they come back, they'll find us easily," Arthur replied with firm kindness. "My farm is well known in the area. Anyone can give directions. But ma'am, Eleanor Hope. And this is my husband, Samuel Corbin. Mrs. Hope, with all due respect, it's not safe for you to stay here on the road. The sun is getting stronger, and you need proper care." Samuel held Eleanor's arm with his trembling hands. "Eleanor, the young man is right. I'm tired, very tired." For the first time since Arthur had found them, Eleanor showed signs that her facade of strength was crumbling. Her shoulders slumped slightly, and she closed her eyes as if fighting a deep internal pain. "All right," she whispered, "but only until we can talk to our children." Arthur helped the couple to their feet, noticing how heavily Samuel leaned on Eleanor, who, despite her own frailty, still found the strength to care for her husband. He improvised a more comfortable seat for them in the wagon he had brought to transport the milk bottles, covering the wooden bench with clean blankets he always carried for emergencies. During the journey to Green Hope Farm, Arthur watched his passengers from the corner of his eye. Eleanor maintained an upright posture, but her hands nervously smoothed the hem of her hospital gown. Samuel swayed gently with the wagon's movement, occasionally muttering about past times at the steel mill. "I worked 42 years at the East Texas Steel Works," Samuel said suddenly, with a clarity that surprised everyone. "I helped build the first bridge over the Trinity River. My children were small then. Vincent was only 5, and Roseanne was a baby." Eleanor took her husband's hand. "He was a very respected man," she told Arthur. "Supervisor of the rolling section, never missed a day of work in his entire career." "And you, ma'am? What was your profession?" Arthur asked, genuinely interested. "Elementary school teacher," Eleanor replied with a touch of pride in her voice. 40 years teaching children from 1st to 4th grade. I retired 2 years ago." Arthur felt an immediate connection. "I was also a teacher before taking over the farm, 3rd grade at Oak Valley Elementary." For the first time since they met, Eleanor offered a genuine smile. "Then you understand," she said, "the responsibility we feel for the children, how hard it is to see them suffer." Her voice trailed off again, and Arthur realized there were deeper layers of pain in this story. The abandonment by their own children was just the tip of an iceberg of suffering that was beginning to be revealed. Green Hope Farm appeared on the horizon like an oasis of tranquility in the middle of the plains. The main house, built in a colonial style with white walls and a red ceramic roof, was surrounded by well-tended gardens and century-old pecan trees. The stable and corrals stretched out behind the house, where dozens of dairy cows grazed peacefully in the shade of the trees. "What a beautiful place," Eleanor murmured, and Arthur could hear a note of nostalgia in her voice. "It was a lot like the farm where I grew up," Samuel said, again showing moments of lucidity, "before we moved to the city when I started working at the mill." Arthur stopped the wagon in front of the porch of the house. 3 employees approached curiously. Mrs. Gable, the 55-year-old housekeeper who had cared for the house since Arthur took over the property, John Peter, the 40-year-old ranch hand responsible for the cattle, and Myrtle, the 22-year-old girl who helped with domestic chores. "Mrs. Gable," Arthur called as he helped Eleanor down from the wagon, "please prepare the guest room, and perhaps some hot tea and something light to eat." Mrs. Gable, a practical and motherly woman, immediately understood the situation. Her experienced eyes quickly assessed the elderly couple's condition, and she nodded efficiently. "Of course, Mr. Arthur. I'll prepare a warm bath too, and I have some fresh chicken soup that's just been made." Arthur led Eleanor and Samuel to the porch, where wooden rocking chairs offered a panoramic view of the property. The air was fragrant with the jasmine growing on the trellises, and the gentle sound of bells hanging from the cows' necks created an atmosphere of peace that contrasted sharply with the abandonment the couple had experienced on the road. "I'm going to try to contact your children," Arthur said, taking out his old cell phone. "Do you have their numbers?" Eleanor hesitated before reciting Vincent and Roseanne's numbers. Arthur dialed the first one, waiting anxiously for the connection. The phone rang several times before going straight to voicemail. He tried the second number and got the same result. "Strange," he murmured. "I'll try again later. Maybe they're in an area with no signal." But deep in his heart, Arthur already suspected that those numbers were being purposely ignored. The whole situation had the hallmarks of a planned abandonment, and the realization of this possibility made his determination to protect the couple grow even stronger. As the afternoon wore on and the sun began to dip toward the horizon, it became increasingly clear that Vincent and Roseanne would not be coming back for their parents. And when Eleanor finally allowed her defenses to fall and cried silently in the rocking chair, Arthur knew his life had changed forever. These two elderly people were no longer strangers on his farm. They had become his responsibility and perhaps his new family. The first rays of the next morning's sun found Eleanor sitting on the farmhouse porch, watching the cows being led to the morning milking. She had only slept a few hours, her body still tense with the anxiety of not knowing her children's whereabouts. Samuel remained in the room, lost in a restless sleep, where he murmured the names of colleagues from the steelworks he had left decades ago. Arthur appeared on the porch, carrying 2 cups of fresh coffee, steam rising in the still, cool morning air. His movements were careful, respectful, as if he understood that any sudden gesture might frighten the woman he had found in the most vulnerable condition of her life. "How did you sleep, Mrs. Hope?" he asked, offering one of the cups. "I couldn't sleep well," she admitted, accepting the coffee with still trembling hands. "I keep wondering where Vincent and Roseanne could be. Maybe they had a problem, an accident." Arthur sat in the chair beside her, choosing his words carefully. During the night, he had tried again to contact Eleanor's children, without success. More troublingly, he had made a few discreet calls to acquaintances in Cedar Creek and discovered some disturbing information. "Mrs. Hope, I need to tell you a few things I found out," he said gently. "Last night I spoke with a friend who works at the hospital where you were admitted." Eleanor's face tensed with anxiety. "And what did he say?" "Your children checked you out of the hospital against medical advice. The doctors were worried about Mr. Corbin's condition and wanted to run more tests. Vincent and Roseanne signed a liability waiver and took you away against the doctor's orders." Eleanor placed the cup on the floor with trembling hands. "That doesn't make sense. They said the doctors had discharged Samuel, that there was nothing more they could do for him." "There's more," Arthur continued, seeing the need to be completely honest. "My friend told me your children seemed very nervous, rushed. They asked several times about the treatment costs and if there was any way to transfer the financial responsibility." The reality began to form in Eleanor's mind, like a dark storm. For 67 years, she had trusted her children, sacrificed her own dreams to educate them, worked double shifts as a teacher to pay for their college educations. The possibility that they had deliberately abandoned her was almost impossible to accept. "They wouldn't do that," she murmured, but her voice lacked conviction. "Vincent is a civil engineer. He has an established life. Roseanne is married, has 2 small children. They're just going through a hard time." Arthur watched the internal struggle playing out on the woman's face. He recognized that denial, the desperation to protect the image of loved ones, even when all evidence pointed to a painful truth. He had seen the same expression on the faces of parents whose children were lost to drugs, of betrayed wives who insisted on their husband's innocence. At that moment, Mrs. Gable appeared on the porch with a breakfast tray. Fresh bread, white cheese, homemade peach preserves, and fruit picked from the farm itself. The housekeeper had prepared everything with special care, instinctively understanding that these guests needed much more than just food. "How is Mr. Corbin this morning?" Mrs. Gable asked, setting the breakfast table. "Still sleeping," Eleanor replied. "Last night he had an episode. He got very agitated, talking about machines that don't exist anymore, looking for people who have been gone for years." Arthur frowned. "Does this happen often?" "It started about 6 months ago," Eleanor explained, finally allowing the truth to begin to emerge. At first, it was just small memory lapses. He would ask the same thing several times, or couldn't remember where he left his tools. Then he started getting lost when he went out alone. She paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "The neighbors started to complain. They said Samuel was disturbing the peace, that he was wandering into their yards, looking for work colleagues who retired decades ago. Vincent was furious, said we were embarrassing the family. The real story was beginning to reveal itself, layer by layer, like peeling an onion." Arthur felt anger growing in his chest, but he kept his expression calm so as not to alarm Eleanor further. "Is that when they decided to admit him?" he asked. "Vincent said it was the only solution," Eleanor replied, tears beginning to stream silently down her face. "That I was too old to take care of Samuel alone, that he needed professional care. They promised it was temporary, just until they found a suitable place for both of us." "A suitable place for both of you?" Arthur repeated, a chill running down his spine. "A nursing home," Eleanor murmured. "They said they had found a very good one in Dallas, that we could be together, have proper medical care. They just needed a few weeks to organize the paperwork and the financing." Arthur had to control himself not to express the outrage he felt. The picture was becoming clear. The children had admitted their parents with the intention of getting rid of them permanently, probably to avoid the costs and responsibilities of elder care. "Do you own your own home in Cedar Creek?" he asked. "We do," Eleanor replied with a touch of pride. "A simple little house, but it's ours. Samuel bought it with his retirement money 15 years ago. It has 3 bedrooms, a small living room, a large kitchen. It was always our little peaceful corner." "And where are the keys?" Eleanor hesitated. "Vincent took them to do a general cleaning while we were at the hospital. He said that when we came back, everything would be tidy and ready for visitors." Every new piece of information confirmed Arthur's worst suspicions. He had worked long enough with broken families to recognize the signs of planned abandonment. The children had systematically isolated their parents, controlled their keys and documents, and finally abandoned them when they became too inconvenient. Samuel appeared on the porch at that moment, wearing clean clothes that Mrs. Gable had provided, a simple cotton shirt and comfortable pants that belonged to Arthur. His grey hair was combed, and there was a momentary gleam of lucidity in his blue eyes. "Good morning," he said, looking around with curiosity. "What a beautiful place. Reminds me of my grandfather's farm in Oak Valley." Eleanor quickly stood up and hugged him. "How are you feeling today, my love?" "Better," Samuel replied, allowing her to guide him to a chair. I slept well for the first time in months. That hospital bed was too hard. Arthur watched the interaction between the couple, noticing how Eleanor automatically assumed the role of caregiver, checking if Samuel was comfortable, if he needed anything. The mutual dedication between them was clear, making the abandonment by their own children even crueler. "Mr. Corbin," Arthur said, "your wife told me you worked on the construction of the first bridge over the Trinity River?" Samuel's eyes lit up. "Oh, yes. A project by engineer Sullivan. It took us 2 years to build. I was responsible for welding the main beams. Hard work, but I was very proud of the result." For the next 15 minutes, Samuel spoke with impressive clarity about his years at the steelworks, the projects he had participated in, the friends he had made. It was as if his old memories were perfectly preserved, while only the present became confused in his mind. "Dad was always very smart," said a familiar voice behind them. They all turned to see a man of about 45 approaching the porch, tall, well-dressed with dark hair and an expression that tried to convey concern, but, to Arthur's experienced eyes, seemed forced. "Vincent!" Eleanor exclaimed, rising quickly. "Thank God! We were so worried. Where have you been? Why didn't you answer our calls?" Vincent Hope quickly kissed his mother's forehead, but his eyes were already sizing up Arthur with suspicion. "We had some car trouble, Mom. The battery died and we got stranded on the road. We only managed to get to town this morning." Arthur stood up, extending his hand in greeting. "I'm Arthur Miller. I found your parents on the road yesterday and brought them to my farm." "Thank you very much," Vincent said, shaking his hand with unnecessary force. "I hope they weren't any trouble." "Absolutely none," Arthur replied, maintaining a cordial tone but carefully studying the man's reactions. "Where's Roseanne?" Eleanor asked. "Is she okay?" "Roseanne is in town sorting out some problems," Vincent answered quickly. "Insurance paperwork, you know how it is." Samuel looked at his son with confusion. "Vincent, you look different, older." "I'm fine, Dad," Vincent replied with barely concealed impatience. "Come on, we need to go. We have a lot to sort out today." Arthur noticed how Vincent avoided looking his parents directly in the eye, how his hands fidgeted nervously, how he seemed anxious to leave as soon as possible. All the signs of someone hiding something important. "Where are we going?" Eleanor asked. "Home." Vincent hesitated for a fraction of a second, long enough to confirm Arthur's suspicions. "We're still fixing some things at the house. You'll stay in a hotel for a few more days in the meantime." "But son," Eleanor protested, "we don't have money for a hotel. Our retirement barely covers." "Don't worry about that," Vincent interrupted. "It's all taken care of." Arthur stepped forward. "Excuse me, Vincent, but perhaps your parents should rest a little longer before traveling. Your father had a rough night." "Thank you for your concern," Vincent replied coldly, "but we're his family. We know what's best." At that moment, Samuel stood up abruptly, looking around with a confused expression. "Where are my tools? I need to finish the job on the bridge. Engineer Sullivan is waiting." Eleanor rushed to calm her husband, but Vincent seemed to see it as an opportunity. "You see, he's getting worse. He needs specialized care that you can't provide here." Arthur watched the scene unfold, every instinct in his body screaming that something was terribly wrong. The way Vincent spoke about his parents, as if they were a problem to be solved, as if their condition was just an inconvenience in his organized life. "Maybe I can help," Arthur said calmly. "I have experience with the elderly. My godfather faced similar problems before he passed away." "That won't be necessary," Vincent replied sharply. "We already have everything arranged." But as he spoke, Eleanor held Samuel's hand and looked him in the eyes, and something passed between them. A silent communication developed over decades of marriage. And for the first time since Arthur had met her, he saw a spark of defiance in the elderly woman's eyes. Vincent, Eleanor said with a voice that, though trembling, carried decades of authority as a teacher, I want to see our house. I want to see what you've done with our things. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken tension, and Arthur knew that Vincent's next move would reveal far more about his true intentions than any word he had ever uttered. Vincent's face twisted into an expression of barely concealed irritation. For a few seconds, he stared at his mother as if recalculating a strategy that had been interrupted by an unexpected variable. Arthur watched this hesitation closely, recognizing the signs of someone caught off guard. "Mom, the house is under construction," Vincent finally said, his voice sounding forced. "We're doing some renovations. It's not safe for you to go in right now." Eleanor straightened her shoulders, and for the first time since Arthur had met her, he glimpsed the determined teacher she had been for 40 years. "What kind of renovations, Vincent? When we left the house 2 weeks ago, there were no structural problems." "Electrical issues," he answered quickly. "We found out the wiring was old, dangerous. We need to redo everything before you go back." Samuel, who had momentarily calmed down, lifted his head. "The wiring was new," he said with surprising clarity. "I redid it all in 2018 when I retired. I called Tony the electrician, the one who lives on Flower Street. He can confirm it." The silence that followed was heavy. Vincent opened and closed his mouth a few times, clearly searching for a new explanation. Arthur felt a mixture of sadness and indignation as he realized how Vincent had underestimated his own parents' mental capacity. "Anyway," Vincent said, recovering quickly, "we can't leave you here. This gentleman has already done more than enough for you." "Actually," Arthur intervened calmly, "they are very welcome here for as long as they need. I have plenty of space, and Mrs. Gable loves having company." "That's very kind," Vincent replied coldly, "but we have our own arrangements." Just then, Vincent's cell phone rang. He answered quickly, stepping away. Although he spoke softly, Arthur managed to catch fragments of the conversation. "No, not yet. They're at some stranger's farm. Yes, I know it's risky. I need to get them out of here now." When Vincent returned, his expression was even more tense. "We need to go, now." "Son," Eleanor said, her voice gaining strength, "I want to talk to Roseanne. I want to hear from her own mouth that everything is all right." "She's busy," Vincent replied abruptly. "Then call her, now." The authority in Eleanor's voice made Vincent take a step back. For decades, this woman had controlled classrooms full of unruly children, had faced problematic parents and incompetent bureaucrats. Now, for the first time in months, she was finding her voice again. "Mom, you don't understand the situation." "Then explain it to me," she interrupted. "Explain why we left our home 2 weeks ago for a routine doctor's appointment and never came back. Explain why our phones disappeared. Explain why you and Roseanne vanished and left us on the side of a road." Each of Eleanor's words was like a hammer shattering Vincent's defenses. Arthur saw the exact moment the man decided to abandon his elaborate excuses and resort to direct intimidation. "Look here," Vincent said, pointing a finger at his mother. "You two are a burden. Dad doesn't even know where he is half the time, and you're getting too old to take care of him. We have our own lives, our own families. We can't carry you on our backs anymore." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. Samuel looked at his son with an expression of confusion and pain that broke the hearts of everyone present. Eleanor paled, as if she had been physically struck. Arthur stepped forward, his voice low but filled with authority. "I think you should leave. Now." "They're coming with me," Vincent insisted. "They're my parents." "They are human beings," Arthur replied, "with a right to dignity and respect. And from the way you just spoke to them, it's clear you're offering neither." Vincent clenched his fists. "You have no right to interfere in my family's affairs. And you have no right to abandon elderly people on the side of a road," Arthur answered, remaining calm, but making his determination clear. At that moment, Mrs. Gable appeared on the porch, followed by John Peter. The housekeeper had heard the shouting and, with her motherly intuition, immediately understood there was a conflict underway. "Is everything all right here, Mr. Arthur?" asked John Peter, his calloused rancher's hands positioned to show he was ready to intervene if necessary. The presence of Arthur's loyal employees completely changed the dynamic of the situation. Vincent looked around, quickly assessing that he was at a numerical and territorial disadvantage. "This isn't over," he said, his voice trembling with anger and frustration. "I'll be back with the police. I'll accuse you of kidnapping." "Do that," Arthur replied calmly. "I'm sure the police will be very interested to know why you abandoned two sick, elderly people on the side of a road." Vincent took one last look at his parents, who remained seated as if in shock, processing the cruelty of the words they had just heard from their own son. Without another word, he turned and walked quickly toward a blue car that Arthur hadn't noticed before, parked at the farm's entrance. As the car sped away, kicking up dust, Eleanor began to cry silently. They were not tears of despair, but of a deep and ancient pain, as if something inside her had finally broken for good. Samuel approached his wife and, in a touching moment of lucidity, hugged her. "Don't cry, Eleanor," he said softly. "We raised our children with love. If they forgot that love, that's their problem, not ours." Arthur sat in the chair next to the couple, giving them a few moments to process what had happened. His mind was already working on the next steps needed to protect these two vulnerable seniors. "Mrs. Hope, Mr. Corbin," he said finally, "I want you to know that you have a place here for as long as you need, not as guests, but as family." Eleanor looked up with swollen eyes. "We can't accept your charity." "It's not charity," Arthur interrupted. "It's humanity. And besides, this farm is too big for me alone. You'd be doing me a favor by staying." Over the next few hours, as the Texas sun climbed higher, Arthur took practical steps to ensure the couple's safety. He called Dr. Henry Alcott, the family doctor in Oak Valley, and scheduled appointments for both of them. He contacted Ms. Clara Mendez, a lawyer specializing in elder law, explaining the situation and asking for legal guidance. Mrs. Gable, with her motherly efficiency, had already begun to permanently adapt the guest room, providing suitable clothing and organizing a comfortable space where the couple could have privacy but also safety. Late in the afternoon, while Eleanor and Samuel were resting, Arthur received a call from Ms. Mendez. The news was not good. "Arthur," the lawyer said, "I've managed to get some worrying information about your new guest's situation. There are records that Vincent Hope tried to obtain a general power of attorney from his parents 3 months ago, claiming mental incapacity for both." "Did he get it?" Arthur asked, his stomach tightening. "Not completely. The clerk's office required an independent medical evaluation, which the parents refused to do at the time. But there's more. I found records of him requesting information about his parents' property inventory at the county records office." Arthur felt anger surge in his chest. He was planning to take their property. It seems so, and there's something even more concerning. "I managed to get in touch with a social worker from the hospital where they were admitted. Vincent specifically asked about procedures to declare his parents as missing persons after a period of absence." Arthur's blood ran cold. He was planning to declare them dead. It's a possibility. If they disappeared and were declared dead after a few years, all assets would automatically pass to the children. Arthur looked out the window to the porch, where Eleanor and Samuel were dozing peacefully in the rocking chairs, unaware of the extent of the betrayal they had suffered. The realization that he had likely saved their lives by finding them on the road weighed on his shoulders like a sacred responsibility. "Ms. Mendez," he said, "I need to file a formal complaint. Elder abandonment, attempted embezzlement, negligence, everything possible. "I'll prepare the documents," she replied. "But Arthur, you need to be prepared. This could become a long and difficult legal battle. Vincent won't give up his parents' assets easily." "Then we'll fight," Arthur replied with determination. "These people don't deserve to spend their final years suffering because of their own children's greed." When he finished the call, Arthur remained at the window, watching the couple who had become his charge. He had started that morning as a single farmer caring only for his cattle and his land. Now, he felt the weight of protecting two lives that had been discarded by their own children like inconvenient trash. But as he watched Eleanor wake up and automatically check if Samuel was comfortable, as he saw the gentle smile she gave him when she noticed he was watching them, Arthur knew he had made the right decision. This farm would finally have the family it had always lacked, and he would do everything in his power to ensure these two elderly people lived their final years with the dignity and love they deserved. Night was falling over East Texas when Arthur made a decision that would change all of their lives. The next morning, they would go to Cedar Creek to confront Vincent and find out exactly what had happened to Eleanor and Samuel's house and belongings. The trip to Cedar Creek the next morning was marked by a tense silence. Eleanor sat beside Arthur in the cab of the pickup truck, her hands clasped in her lap as she watched the familiar landscape unfold through the window. Samuel dozed in the back seat, lulled by the gentle movement of the vehicle and the medication Dr. Alcott had prescribed at the previous day's appointment. "I'm afraid of what we're going to find," Eleanor murmured as they entered the city limits. "Whatever it is," Arthur replied, "we'll face it together." Eleanor and Samuel's house was on Acacia Drive, a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts where simple but well-kept homes housed working-class families. When they arrived at number 247, what they saw confirmed everyone's worst fears. The small three-bedroom house was completely empty. Not just empty of furniture, but stripped even of its curtains and light fixtures. The marks on the walls showed where family pictures had hung for decades, and the scrapes on the floor revealed where heavy furniture had been ripped out without care. Eleanor got out of the truck on trembling legs, her keys still working in the lock that Vincent hadn't bothered to change. When the door opened, a hollow echo reverberated through the stripped rooms. 50 years of life," she whispered, slowly entering the living room that had been the center of her existence. 50 years of memories, all gone. Arthur followed her, his anger growing with each empty room they inspected. In the kitchen, even the cabinets had been removed. In the master bedroom, only marks on the floor indicated where the marital bed had stood for decades. Most cruelly, in the small office where Eleanor used to grade papers and prepare lessons, even the school books had disappeared. "Samuel!" Eleanor called out suddenly, realizing her husband had entered the house alone. They found him standing in the center of what had been his workshop, spinning slowly, as if lost in a familiar labyrinth that had been transformed into something unrecognizable. "Where are my tools?" he asked, his voice thick with painful confusion. "I need to fix the kitchen faucet. Eleanor asked me yesterday." Eleanor's heart broke, seeing her husband search for objects that had been part of his identity his entire adult life. Samuel had been a man who fixed everything with his own hands, who found peace in the meticulous work of repairing and building. Now even that small dignity had been stolen from him. "Let's get out of here," Arthur said gently, guiding the couple back to the truck. But Eleanor stopped on the porch, taking one last look at the house, where she had been happy for so many years. "Arthur," she said, her voice gaining a strength he hadn't heard before, "I want to confront my children. I want them to explain what they did." The determination in her voice was so intense that Arthur knew there was no turning back. For decades, Eleanor had been a woman who avoided conflict, who sacrificed her own desires to keep the family peace. But the sight of the empty house had broken something inside her, releasing a fierce courage that had lain dormant for too long. They found Vincent in his engineering office downtown. When the secretary announced his parents' visit, his expression shifted from surprise to barely concealed irritation. "What are you doing here?" he asked, not even getting up from his desk, which was covered in architectural plans. "I came for answers," Eleanor said, walking into the office like the authoritative teacher she had once been. "And I came for our belongings." "What belongings?" 50 years of life, Vincent. "Our photos, our furniture, your father's tools, my books. Where is everything?" Vincent sighed as if dealing with a stubborn child. "We sold it all. It was just old junk taking up space." The silence that followed was thick. Samuel, who had remained quiet until then, stepped forward. "Junk?" he repeated, and for a moment his voice carried all the authority he had wielded as a supervisor at the steelworks. "My German toolbox that I bought with my first paycheck? Your mother's sewing machine that belonged to her grandmother? The photos from your baptism? Your graduation? That was junk? Dad, you weren't going to use that stuff anymore." "It wasn't yours to decide," Eleanor shouted, startling everyone in the office with the force of her voice. For the first time since Arthur had met him, Vincent seemed genuinely scared. The woman standing before him was no longer the submissive mother who had tolerated his arrogance for months. She was a woman who had found her dignity again and was willing to fight for it. "Did you sell our house too?" Arthur asked. "Not yet," Vincent admitted reluctantly, "but we're going to. They're in no condition to live alone." "That's not your decision either," Arthur replied, "and you know it." Just then Roseanne entered the office carrying a folder of documents. When she saw her parents, her face paled. "Mom? Dad? What are you doing here?" "Asking where our lives have gone," Eleanor replied, turning to her daughter. "Asking how you could do this to us." Roseanne looked nervously at her brother. We thought it would be for the best, a fresh start. A fresh start without memories, without dignity, without a choice." For the first time, Arthur saw tears in Roseanne's eyes. Unlike Vincent, who seemed motivated purely by greed and convenience, there was something in Roseanne that suggested internal conflict. "We didn't know what to do," she said, her voice breaking. "Vincent said you needed professional care, that the house was too much for you. And you believed the solution was to abandon us on the side of a road?" Samuel asked, his lucidity as sharp as a blade. Roseanne began to sob. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Vincent said you would be taken directly to a nursing home." "What nursing home, Roseanne?" Arthur pressed. I don't know. Vincent handled everything." The truth was finally emerging. Vincent had manipulated even his own sister, using her fears about their parents' future to justify a plan that in reality was aimed only at getting rid of them permanently. "Enough!" Vincent exploded. "You don't understand. Dad is sick. Mom is getting old. We have our own families, our own problems. We can't carry you anymore." "No one asked you to carry us," Eleanor answered with fierce dignity. "We only asked not to be thrown away like trash." Arthur stepped forward. "Vincent, you have until tomorrow to return all the belongings you sold, or at least their equivalent value. And you will sign the paperwork relinquishing all powers of attorney and rights to your parents' assets. And if I refuse, then you will face criminal charges for elder abandonment, embezzlement and fraud. I'm sure your professional license as an engineer would be reviewed as well." Vincent's face turned red with rage, but behind the fury, Arthur could see fear. Men like him were always cowards when confronted with the consequences of their actions. 3 months later, as the sun set over Green Hope Farm, Eleanor and Samuel sat on the porch that had become their new home. The rocking chairs moved gently in the cool evening air, and the sound of the cows returning from the pasture created a symphony of peace that had been absent from their lives for too long. Samuel held a new toolbox that Arthur had bought him, his fingers familiarly tracing the outlines of the instruments that gave him back a part of his identity. Eleanor was flipping through a history book she had started writing. The memories of her life as a teacher and the lessons she had learned about true family. "You know what I've discovered?" she said to Arthur, who was approaching with 3 cups of coffee. "What's that, Mrs. Hope?" "That family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about choice, about people who choose to love you when others choose to abandon you." Arthur smiled, sitting in the chair beside them. "And I've discovered that an empty farm is not a home. A home needs people who care about each other." Samuel looked up from his tools. "And I've discovered that even when we forget some things, we never forget what true love is." Vincent had fulfilled his legal obligations, returning the money from the sale of the belongings and signing documents that guaranteed his parents' independence. Roseanne had visited a few times, trying to rebuild a bridge that had been burned by greed and fear. But for Eleanor and Samuel, those sporadic visits were no longer the center of their existence. They had found a new family at Green Hope Farm. Mrs. Gable had adopted them as the parents she never had. John Peter included Samuel in small farm tasks that gave him back his sense of purpose. And Arthur had discovered that caring for people who returned that care with genuine love was infinitely more rewarding than the loneliness he had embraced for so long. As the stars began to appear in the Texas sky, the 3 of them remained on the porch, united by a family they had chosen instead of one that had been imposed upon them. And for the first time in years, they all knew exactly where they belonged. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment what you thought of my story, giving it a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.